The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. And we are pleased to connect you this morning with the House Majority Leader, Kirk Cox.
Woody, it's always good to be with you, and thank you for doing this for us. We appreciate it.
We appreciate you being here. And, of course, Delegate Riley Ingram, Mr. Chairman, County, Cities, and Towns.
Thank you, Woody. It's always a pleasure, and we do appreciate you doing this for the people back home.
Well, I wanted to congratulate both of you. I think you've set a record this year in terms of getting bills accomplished before crossover. I take it that a lot of your committee chairmen worked very hard to get that done.
They really did. Now, in fairness, we had a few less bills. We actually have something like 60% of the members have been here less than 6 years. So you can tend to have less bills with less senior people. But, for example, there were probably 52 to 54 ethics bills put in. We really had a good process where we had a Republican chief patron, Todd Gilbert, Jennifer McClellan from Richmond, a Democrat, was the chief co-patron, worked on it together, came up with one omnibus bill that made a lot of sense. And so that really helped the floor as far as not having just 52 different bills, et cetera. So there was a lot of good consolidation in the committees, the mental health issue, which of course is a very tough issue with Creed son. But once again, real good work on consolidating some of those issues into 2 or 3 bills to sort of address holistically those kind of issues.
And of course, your committee considered a lot of legislation so far this session. Talk to us about some of it.
I have a chairman of County, Cities, and Towns Committee, and I have 2 strong subcommittees. In other words, 10 members on one, 11 members on the other. So, Woody, what they do is they screen the legislation very, very good. Very seldom do we have something that comes up before the full committee that has not been heard in the subcommittee. But the process works good. Woody, back when years ago when Kirk and I were there, one morning we were there until 10 after 3 in the morning.
10 after 3.
Yes, and I told the speaker and Kirk both, since I've been there, I've never known us to get out. But the process is so much different now. We handle controversial issues from the first week. I mean, we start working on controversial issues. And used to be, we did not work on controversial issues until the last 2 weeks of the session. I mean, last 2 weeks before crossover. And so we came into a log jam, and now that doesn't work anymore. That doesn't happen anymore. And I congratulate the majority leader because Kurt here has done a great job in streamlining this. He's been a big, big help in that. Really.
And of course, you've had some success on a bill that has been around for some time.
It has.
Talk to us about it. I know it deals with check cashing and protecting people.
Yes, and the check cashing bill, all it does, Woody, is just require some form of identification for someone that goes to a check cashing establishment where they get paid a fee for cashing a check. And all it requires is for them to have some form of ID and keep it on record for just 6 months. And so I'm very, very pleased to say that at least we've got something on the books.
Well, good luck in the Senate.
Thank you.
Delegate Cox, Medicaid has been with us for some time. That cost has increased above and beyond what the Affordable Care Act allows the states to do now. Talk to us about the Medicaid Innovation Reform Commission, why that was put into place, where it is now, and why your stance on no Medicaid expansion makes sense.
What is a tough issue with passionate beliefs on both sides. But Medicaid, as it's currently configured, is a 50-50 match program. Medicaid expansion, and this is what the proponents would argue, the federal government will pay 100% of Medicaid expansion in the first 3 years, and then afterwards 90%. Our feeling, we set up what's called the Merck Commission, and the Merck Commission is basically the Medicaid it's a reform commission that basically says the following. Medicaid is a broken program. It's 1,600% increase in Medicaid spending over the last 30 years. It now consumes 22% of our budget. It was around 10% when I got here. It's really starting to crowd out other things like K-12 and higher ed. So our feeling is we've got to reform Medicaid before you can even think about expanding it. And I'll give you an example. 30% of doctors currently don't even take Medicaid patients. And that's a real problem. That's because their reimbursements are so low. You have a group of clientele that both qualify for Medicare and Medicaid.
The dual eligible.
Dual eligible.
Yeah.
And there's no coordination of their services whatsoever. There's no talking between doctors. There's no talking between which benefits they get. So we find ourselves spending a lot of money on that population. As a matter of fact, I've been told there are literally hundreds of millions of dollars worth of savings if you can do the dual eligible population effectively. We just started that demonstration project. I think at the very least we are saying let's get the reforms in place first before we consider expanding Medicaid. And the other big issue is I think both sides really want to try to have good health care, affordable health care. So we both have good motives. My other concern about Medicaid is that will the federal government be able to reimburse us even at 90% down the road? They're really looking at a $17 trillion gap right now as far as their deficit goes. Medicare has already been cut. It was cut in the last round of budget cuts. And so if that's already been cut, and a lot of the hospitals and other problems is with Medicare. Those are apples and oranges. So we're afraid that in a few years those Medicaid cuts will be pretty dramatic, and then the state will have to pick up the cost. We just don't think we have the money to do that. But it's a very tough issue. There's no question.
Go ahead.
What Kurt is saying is very, very true. Give you an example. The federal government doesn't always live up to their mandates on the localities or whatever that they want to do. City of Hopewell, 3 years ago, the federal government provided the funds to extend the bus service from Petersburg into Hopewell. Guess what? This year they stopped. So now the city of Hopewell has got to put in their budget, which they're doing for 1 year, $186,000. They negotiated this down because it was 200 and some thousand. This is a prime example of what Kurt was just talking about the federal government not living up to their end of the bargain. And this is what concerns me about Medicaid. Plus the fact the federal government is steady going further and further in debt, all the time, barring if China pulled a plug on us right now, we would probably be bankrupt. And so that's our big concern is who's going to pay. In other words, if it falls back on the citizens of Virginia, the taxes are going to go up, and I just don't see how we can sustain it.
Delegate Cox, I take it that category of dual eligibles is growing because people are living longer, but that's going to cost Medicaid even more because Medicare does not take care of long-term care. Medicaid takes care of part of that, as I understand it.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, Medicaid basically, when it was designed, was for the disabled. It was for, women with children, et cetera. So you're right. I mean, it's a different category. And I think you're exactly right. I mean, the population is living longer, and I think that's obviously part of the problem. But sort of from a budgetary standpoint, our real dilemma right now is that I have to say, don't even feel like if you expanded Medicaid, that would absolutely guarantee you better health outcomes. If you look at some other states, frankly, that's not been the story. A lot of times, you still ended up with a lot of Medicaid patients in hospitals. They will tell you that from their, personal perspective, they feel better off, but their health outcomes aren't a whole lot better. So one of the things we're also grappling with is, does it really help keep that population healthier? I mean, what are the real results? But I think the biggest issue for us, Woody, is that where are we going to be in 5 or 10 years? I mean, we've been told, whether it be Medicare or Medicaid, if you go back and look at the projections when the programs came in 64 and 65, Medicaid, for example, is projected to cost like $285 million. Well, the first year it was $1 billion. So they were off by 4 times in the first year. And of course, the proponents of Medicaid, to be fair, says there will be a certain $1 billion worth of savings. Our feeling is those numbers probably won't come to be true.
Mental health. That's another item that's been on the agenda, apparently is going to be dealt with, but it's a much larger problem than how long we detain people who may be a danger to themselves or others. Talk to us about that issue, but also how the order of magnitude of the mental health issues in the Commonwealth?
Well, this is something, Woody, that we probably should have. We've been working on this for a while, but this with the senator having the problem that he had, it's been escalated now to come to the top, and we've done something about it. Now, I had a bill that did not pass, but they're working with the Senate now to extend the time that someone can be held to 24 hours, and then with a maximum of 74 hours. But what they have done now with this is they have consolidated this so that they will have beds available, and it'll go to the other places where that they will have the beds. I don't know what went wrong with that, but I understand now that there were beds available. So, you know, all that will have to be worked out. But this is something that we really are trying to attack and get our hands on. And the Senate has passed bills, the House has passed bills, and I'm sure that some of them will be in a committee of conference to work it out.
So the creation of a statewide database that can instantly identify availability of beds, and of course working out in conference the difference between 8 hours and 24 hours, I think, with the respective bodies.
Yeah, I would say the bed registry is important, but I hope we don't oversell it. It is going to be impossible to have a 100% true bed registry. You could have one where hospitals have to update, you know, what beds they have available during the day. But here's the problem, for example. You might be a local hospital that has 6 really crisis patients. And I mean, the very severe behavioral problems. You might have a bed on the registry that's available, but you're not going to take that 7th crisis patient. Now, one day you might have 4 that are less severe. You might take them. So that worker's still going to have to call around and see, is that bed really available? And so that's a little bit problematic. So I think it's a good idea. It's not a panacea. And even with the 24 and 8 hours, those are important steps. You can argue which is better, but I think there are things that can really affect getting people services that maybe have more of an effect. I'll give you an example. PAC teams. PAC teams are an interdisciplinary team that will go out, for example, let's say someone's bipolar and has a lot of different issues. They can make sure they're on their medications. They'll tell you the bigger problem is they go off their medications. And they'll make sure they're taking their medications. They will really work with that person to keep them out of that situation. Drop-off centers, which I think is going to be one of the solutions, where you can drop the person off in a secured setting. They can be dealt with where that police officer, that sheriff doesn't have to stay with them necessarily the entire time. That will help solve some of that problem beyond just the 24 and 8. Because, you know, the problem obviously with the 24-hour issue is a lot of sheriff's departments don't like that because of the cost. So that's a tough issue. But I think we focus so much on that. There are some other things that we can do. And as far as the sort of the bed of last resort, what happens is you have a crisis counselor call, you know, a local hospital like John Randolph, and then Southside or Poplar Springs. If there are no beds available, this would allow at least some emergency beds at one of your state facilities to be used. That's not ideal, because you'd rather place them, if you can, you know, in a private setting, but at least you would know that would be a backup. Those are expensive beds, though. They're
I'm sure. Delegate Ingram, we still have a lingering issue concerning the settlement that the Commonwealth entered into with the Department of Justice regarding transitioning those who are institutionalized in our training centers to a community setting. And I know a lot of parents of those institutionalized are still upset about that. And I think there's been some legislation regarding it.
Woody, let me tell you, though, there was a gentleman and his wife that came to my office, and they were completely against this all the way. They're from Prince George County, and I toured a home over there where they put his daughter. She's only 10 minutes away from his house. He was a real live testimony. He did a complete turnaround. He said that he was so happy. Her daughter, before, when she was at Central State, she was happy there, and he didn't want to move her. She is really happy now. She's only 10 minutes from his house. He goes over and sees her. That is the difference. Now, there are some, Woody, that we cannot put into that environment. There are some that really need special care. And these people, we're going to do something with that. We don't know yet what we're going to do, but we're going to take care of these people that cannot take care of themselves. And because some of them are bedridden, They cannot dress themselves. They can't do anything, and they're going to need special care, and we're going to look out for that. I'm on the committee that is looking at this and having public hearings on it, and we're going to Northern Virginia right after session's over, probably sometime in April, and even if we go into overtime on the session, we will still have, 3-day breaks and things like this, if it should come to that. But we're looking at this on all aspects because we understand the person that's there. We also understand the parents of a lot of these people, or the sisters or brothers or what have you. But Woody, we're definitely working on it.
And Delegate Cox, many of these parents are elderly themselves. They've got 40 and 50-year-old children,
right,
so to speak, adult children in these facilities. They want some assurance that the community setting will be as good, if not better, than where they currently are being housed.
I'm pretty supportive of the community setting. If you look at other states that have deinstitutionalized, they've been pretty successful. And I have some personal stories like Raleigh of constituents have been adamantly opposed. The group home really worked out, and there's so many things you can do through medical technology today that you couldn't do 20 years ago. I think the issue that maybe be the bigger issue coming up is going to be the waiting list we have for people that are intellectually disabled or developmentally disabled, and currently their parents are aging out, and so they might be 60, 65 years old. They're on a waiting list to get services. I think that's where the crisis might come if we can't deal with that issue pretty quickly, because then what do? And so we have sort of a dual issue, those coming out of the training centers and those on the waiting list. And I am very supportive. We've put, under the leadership of our chairman of the health subcommittee, we've put a lot of money into more ID and DD waivers, and I'm very supportive of that. But here's an example of Medicaid expansion. Our DOJ settlement that we had was supposed to cost X. It's cost us literally millions more than what the projections were. So once again, and that's fine because that's something we need to do. But once again, this is where projections were so far off, and now we're having to budget a lot more money. And of course, I'm afraid the same thing is going to happen with Medicaid expansion.
Turning to education, standards of learning reform, apparently that's going to occur. We want to make sure that our students are not only learning facts that they need to learn, of course, but we want to make sure that they're able to engage in critical analysis.
Woody, in talking with the people in my district, one of the biggest things that they were complaining about was SOLs. And we have done something about that. And I'm pleased to say that we've all worked together, Democrats, Republicans, the whole thing, to do something about that. And because we want our young people to have the best education they possibly can, and this is an issue that we really listen to. We listen to the people back home and try to do something about it for them.
And Delegate Cox, I take it you listen to your brother, who's still a superintendent. You being a former teacher, know these issues inside and out.
Would show I'm still hip. Shout out to my brother Joe. But Woody, you're right. But I do want everyone to be fairly cautious on this issue. The House bill, which I think is very good, reduces essentially 5 elementary middle school tests, and I think that's where to start. It keeps high school pretty much the same because of all the credits you get, et cetera. We do need to go in a prudent manner. I came into teaching when we didn't have any standards. We had no pacing, and that was really problematic because you had teachers teaching a U.S. history survey course that would spend the entire year on the Civil War. There's a lot more to history than the Civil War. There's obviously, the Revolutionary War, the Civil Rights Movement, and that's not what a student needs to get. So I'm not for blowing the standards up. I'm for a much more manageable number. Critical thinking skills, you make such a good point, are very essential, but there are some basic facts you have to know. So that mixture, and I'll say the last thing, we have really interesting ways of measuring kids better today. For example, computer adaptive testing. I can ask you a question, and if you get it right, I can ask you a harder question. If you get it wrong, I'll ask you an easier question. I can figure out exactly where you are and then work with you on your student growth. So that's a neat way to, I think, really advance the ball. And so there's some neat things we can do today sort of to figure out more where you're at, and I think really help you with your student growth, which might be more important than your SOL.
And I know people are looking at the concept of virtual schools where you can get the best of a lecture from someone at a remote location piped into your local school district, for example. That's being done at our institutions of higher learning, but I know there's a lot of talk about doing the same thing at a lower grade level.
two proposals. One is called blended learning, where you will basically, as you say, take your 4 maybe core academic courses at your home school, and then virtually you might take an AP course in French from Alexandria, and you might take whatever from a, an online site from, Hampton. And I like that model. So that's more of a blended learning model, which I think everyone's for. The other bill this year Dickie Bell has in is a standalone virtual school, state school, where you could actually go to that state school. Now, that's much more controversial. I like the concept. I think for a lot of people that's a good fit. Trying to get the funding right for that is very difficult. So what's the local share? What's the state share? The money follows the student the way Dickie has it. Some people, of course, say that they would lose their local share, and that can be problematic. So working that out is a little bit difficult, but it's the wave of the future. That has to be part of the mix of whatever we do.
Delegate Ingram, as a former mayor, I know local control is near and dear to your heart. You hearing anything from your school districts about grading them on an A to F level, and also taking over, and I know you may have one of those school districts in your particular district, the state actually taking over a failing school district?
Yes, and in Petersburg, but Woody, we passed a bill this year that we would delay that for another year. I like the concept in one way, but it's a two-edged sword, because then being in the real estate business, if you have a school that, say, has a D and another school has a A or a B, that people are going to want to go to that school or be located in that district that has an A or B school rather than to have a C, D, or an F school. So, but I do think that we need to have some accountability in the school system so that we do know where the school is. And I think that if I'm for the delay, and because of the reason that I feel like that if we can let the schools see where they are and try to improve, that's what we want to do. And but it's a very hot issue because of some people like it, some people don't like it.
And Delegate Cox, what about early childhood education? I know there's two sides to that story. There are the proponents who say it's absolutely critical. There are those who point to Head Start, which may not have done such a good job. And of course, it costs money. There's no question about that. So as an educator and as a member of the Virginia General Assembly, how do you come down on that issue?
Well, the way you make a great point, Woody. The way pre-K works in our budget is considered with K-12. So the first thing you have to remember is for every dollar you put in pre-K, it comes out of part of the K-12 budget. And so I tell teachers all the time, because as a former teacher, where they try to advocate for helping the teaching profession. But if you put $40 million in the pre-K, please understand that that could be $40 million that went to your help in the classroom. Having said that, I think the key to pre-K is the studies have shown that it probably helps, particularly kids on free lunch. Universal pre-K I'm not for. I am also for a choice model, and I think that's key, is to make sure whatever pre-K model we have, the private sector is involved. I think a lot of your church schools are involved to deliver the model. I think a monolithic model that's only a public model, we don't have the classroom space, we don't have the infrastructure, that would be extremely expensive. So I can consider pre-K more if it is a more private-based model where it's a public-private partnership. And I think the business community is saying that if we're going to go that way, let's at least look at that model. But I think we need to go a little bit slow because we're not funding, frankly, what we're doing currently in the K-12 classroom. So we need to look at that very carefully.
Now, part of the business community is not real happy because it looks like the repeal of the King's Dominion law has gained some traction in this session of the legislature. It gives schools more flexibility. At least half the schools are accepted now anyway. Where do you think that legislation is likely to go?
Well, gosh, there are three separate bills that all do different things. One's an outright repeal. One is a repeal, but you have to have 5 days off for Labor Day. And then you have another one that deals with basically more of your at-risk schools to let them go to year-round model. I've always supported, I'm very sympathetic with the business community, especially those in the tourism industry. I understand that fully. But I do think that the school calendar should be set by the schools. And very quickly, the last few years, I taught some advanced placement courses. Well, the College Board sets that test for me on May the 5th. I can't move that test. It's a national test. So if I go in after Labor Day, I've got to complete all my government studies by May the 4th. Well, then I've got from May the 6th to June the 15th before they graduate. I'd have loved to have had 2 or 3 of those weeks, to get ready for the AP test. So starting early would be very beneficial in some cases. But look, if I was industry, I'd probably be arguing the same thing if I was in the tourism or whatever industry, because I do think it affects them to some degree.
And Woody, what I did, I voted for one of them and voted against the other two. Now let me tell you the one I voted for. I voted for the school to be able to start anytime they want to or go year-round for the schools that are failing, okay? I think that was a good bill. Voted for it. Now, unlike Kirk, I voted against the other two bills, and I especially the one about the having to take off 4 or 5 days, Labor Day. So, you know, that ruined. I voted against that one. I voted against the other one, too, because my district, I have so much industry, and the vacation time is picked by seniority. And so, therefore, I vote against it.
I understand. Now, there was something about biofuels in
Yes,
your district
sir.
you wanted to talk about.
Yes, sir. In Hopewell, we have a plant. It's a biofuels. It's called Veriol plant. And what they want to do is burn you know, grain. I'm not burn grain. What they want to do is it's a giant distillery is what it is, and to have to make ethanol. And so we compromised on it. We had it 3 years ago, and we allowed them 10 cents a gallon, Woody. Well, this bill, the poultry people, we all work together, and now they can use corn for the first year, second year corn and other barley, and then by the third year, for any credit at all, this has to be barley, and it ends in 2017. So that will create 70 jobs in the city of Hopewell, plus this plant. They bought it for just pennies on the dollar. It was over a $200 million investment, and the people from United Kingdom that were investors, they bought it and for like $12 million. And they're going to start this up, and you know, with this incentive grant that we're giving them to do this, and it'll create the jobs and create the tax base there in the Tri-City area, and it'll help.
Another example of job creation and diversity, if you will.
Very much, and Riley Ruck had a really good compromise on that. I mean, obviously some of the poultry producers felt like that could drive up the price of chickens, but he did a real nice compromise on eventually switching to barley, et cetera. So, and it helps my area. I think, you know, when we get those very key jobs, I think it helps all of our areas. So, and I will say, I think Rosalind, Dan, Riley, and I really try to work together on a lot of, you know, regional projects, and we're all in appropriations. So we were pretty supportive of what Riley was trying to do there.
Great. 30 seconds left. Sunday hunting. Looks like we're going to have that on private property.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't understand that. It's on private property. There are limits to it, and so, you know, it did pass. It's been in for 22 or 24 years, but mainly a repeal, a direct repeal. So this would just be private property. But it passed a little bit higher margin, frankly, than I thought it would. It was around 70-30, so interesting issue.
That was a tough vote. And let me tell you, I voted for it, Woody, and every year past, I have been completely against it, and I'm still not for it. But it was, I voted for it because of the no dogs and on private property.
No dogs
Great.
is a big issue, too.
Thank you for being here, Majority Leader Kirk Cox and Delegate Riley Ingram. Mr. Chairman, County, Cities, and Towns. Good to see you.
Thank you, Woody.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. Until next time, I am Woody Evans.